if it's true that leaving your Christmas decorations up beyond the 12 days of Christmas brings bad luck, then I fear we're definitely on the hit list,
Oh, right.
given that we've repeated the Christmas episodes throughout the whole of January. But
Yeah.
there we go. We are back for some more enlightening discussion, amusing rants, and some great music. Well, something like that anyway. I'm Simon Hill. He's Billy Spateman. How are we doing?
We're doing all right, yeah. Well, I've had the lurgy for about 3 weeks,
I have.
so it's been tough really going out and busking really, and the weather's been a bit cold. But other than that, not too bad. And we've had loads of exciting things happen really. We've had Matt at the music shop who gets involved with the Crafty Jar when we do there. They're donating an instrument a month towards our charity. We don't know what exactly. We can't just raffle it off because you can't just raffle a guitar off for a quid.
Yeah.
So we're having to try and devise a way of utilising his kindness, really. But we'll announce it in February anyway. That'll be the first month we'll do it.
That'll be entertaining. Well, no, I seem to have avoided the lurgy. Well, not. I seem to get been a bit snuffly, a bit croaky, but luckily hasn't led to anything yet. So I think I may have got away with it, but we'll see.
Well, fingers crossed.
But so for today, I thought, I'm going to talk about World Braille Day. Got a bit of very much a blind theme for this episode. So it's something I didn't actually realise took place. I mean, to be honest, I switch off from it because there's World Everything Day every day of the year, really. But but this is a relatively new thing, which apparently somebody decided to start in 2019 on January the 4th. I thought I'd use the opportunity to talk about Braille and why it's so important to people like myself, and try and explain a bit how it works, because it's a question I'm often getting asked. And we'll have some music as well. So I thought we'd start. Well, unfortunately, the new year set in, and it didn't take long for the madness to start. Really, did it? Within hours, we'd had people being run over in America, bombs going off, and then so we're not even out of January yet, and already a lot of people have had a very, very difficult and sad start to the year, unfortunately. And I think what it ultimately proves is the Stereophonics once said it only takes one. They said it only takes one match to burn 1,000 trees. Well, unfortunately, it only takes one person with an agenda to cause harm to thousands of people. But World Braille Day and Braille in general. Well, apologies for for those that already know, but I'll start from the beginning and give the full version. So Braille is basically the bumpy writing, as people have often called it to me, which is basically formed out of 6 dots. So the way I try and describe it is, if you think of a dice, which has, and how the dots displayed on that. So, for example, if you have the number 6, so you have the 6 dots, 2 lines of 3 next to each other. That's effectively what one cell, as they call it, of Braille looks like. And then from those 6 dots, different arrangement illustrate the different letters and symbols and numbers. So,
so is it like, in a way, hieroglyphics? You don't actually. It's not the dots that spell the letter. It's its own alphabet in a way.
Yeah, it's complete. Right. I mean, it's funny because I'm always, it's always one of my sadnesses that I'm not very good at speaking foreign languages. But in a way, knowing Braille is its own code, because it's But basically, so for example, if you imagine the 6 dots as I described on a dice, then the top left dot on its own is the letter A. The top left and the middle left is B, and the top left and top right is C. And on it goes through. So it's different combinations that form each letter, and then those letters, to become numbers, that they have a symbol called a number symbol put in front of them. So then they become, what would be A then becomes 1, B 2, and C 3, and so on. So people can these days can go on Google and look at illustrations of of words written in Braille, and it, it's actually my next door neighbour, bless him, the last couple of years he's given me a Christmas card in Braille,
Oh,
but
really?
but he hadn't got it printed off the internet, which is what people normally do. He'd actually, with whatever, a needle or something, he'd looked up how to what the letters were in Braille and embossed it himself in the Christmas card.
Oh, wow, that's
So,
brilliant, isn't it?
I mean,
Did he spell it right correctly? Or?
yeah, like I said, it was actually, I had no idea he'd done it that way until he told me.
Yeah.
So it was an amazing thing to do, and but yeah, but just, I mean, I can go into all the technical stuff in a bit, but just to because I'm sure even if people have heard of it, they don't necessarily know where it all came from. Well, the guy who that we have to thank for being able to communicate really as blind people is Louis Braille, and he was born on the 4th of January 1809, and so that's why World Braille Day is on the 4th of January. Yeah, and he was fine, and he could see and everything until unfortunately when he was 3. He decided to have a go at doing what his father did, which was make leather harnesses. He was French, sorry, I should say. They lived in France, and anyway, he was having a go with one of his dad's tools and a piece of leather, and unfortunately managed to stab himself in the eye. So unfortunately, they couldn't. I mean, going back obviously over 200 years, they weren't blessed with the medical facilities and knowledge that we have now. So he unfortunately lost the sight in the eye damaged, but then due to infection, he eventually also lost the sight in his other eye because they couldn't stop the infection spreading, and he completely lost his sight at the age of 5, which is kind of parallel with me really, because I lost my one eye sooner than he did, but I lost my sight by the time I was 5. So and then he he had siblings, but there was sort of concern then about how he was going to interact with society and everything, because of course the things we take for granted nowadays weren't around. But he went to a school for the blind when he was 11 in France, and where interestingly they were, I mean, I can only imagine what a long and cumbersome process this must have been, but the children there were taught to read and write using embossed print letters. So in other words, they'd make the print letters tactile, and that's how they made books, and then learnt to shape the letters themselves. But I mean,
that must have been. Well, I mean, from a logistical point of view, that must have been incredibly difficult to have a whole book and emboss. I mean, did they physically, I don't know, tape stuff over the letters each one so that you could? I don't know. Where would they do it?
It was done apparently with sort of metal template stencils, effectively, and then sort of I can't remember what the material's called now, but they imprint it onto the material. But it must have been. I mean, it's not like you were doing it with a printing press or something.
Yeah.
It must have taken ages.
Ages and ages, yeah.
So that basically, and because of course there's two sides to communication, which is the if you're the one writing, there's the writing and the reading. So even if you can learn, and I learned, to write in print, and in terms of I know what print letters look like and the shape of them, but of course writing that in such a way that somebody else can read and understand it is a whole different challenge. So when Louis identified that this was an issue, and he came across a similar sort of dotted coded way of writing, which was in its infancy and had been sort of promoted but hadn't really caught on, and he sort of took that idea and played around with it when he was about 15, and he eventually came up. He simplified it basically, so it was quicker to produce it or write it, and easier to read because you could feel each one finger would feel the full letter or the full cell. So rather than needing two hands or more than one finger to work out what a letter was, you could just one finger would immediately tell you. And so he surprisingly, though, it wasn't easy because he was in an institution basically, which they thought their ways were the best, and he had to. It took him years of trying to persuade them and demonstrating how his system would work. And I think one of the most effective ways he demonstrated it was he listened to a speech or a lecture one day, and he made. I mean, again, how he did it, how he kept up with it. I mean, it wasn't a Braille machine. It was just that he was writing out the Braille with a sort of an embossing tool on a sheet of sort of type of metal or something, or some material anyway. And so he basically wrote out what was being said, and then afterwards read it back to them. And they said, "Oh no, you're not reading from that. You've just memorised it." And he was like, "No, test me, And so it's frightening, really. I mean, I'm sure. I mean, I dare say, eventually something else would have come along. But it's a frightening thought for me that, something that was so critical, to me and so many others, very nearly, if he hadn't been determined and believed in it so much, then it might not even have gone anywhere. So
yeah. And is it physically? I mean, when you were learning, is it easy to learn to write in Braille then?
I mean, I've thought a lot about this because
obviously were you able to read and write before you lost your sight?
No, well, this is it. So,
I see.
I guess it's different for me because, I mean, it's funny because I must have known, but I could see. I don't ever remember reading in print
book,
if I ever did.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know. I mean, I could see till I was 4. So, I would have been able, but I honestly can't remember. But so when I went to school, the first thing I ever learnt was Braille. So it was, in terms of it, the thing about it is that I had to go down a completely different learning path to everyone else, because so while they were learning handwriting, I had to be taught separately, and so I ended up having quite, I didn't really think about it at the time, but looking back now, I did spend a lot of my school time learning on my own. But yeah, I mean, I couldn't really say that. I mean, I imagine someone that's learned to read and write in print and is used to that, and then having to adjust to Braille. I've known 1 or 2 people that have had to do that, and and it does take. Well, I'd say it takes time, but then I've known, for example, sighted people, teachers in particular, who within if they started, like when I was at a blind school, they would 1 or 2 of them would come in, and then within a few months they could read Braille, and I was like, well, wow, that's good going.
Is there grammar in Braille the same as there would be if you were writing in freehand? So is there exclamation marks and full stops and commas and stuff?
Yeah, so all of those things have got. There's a Braille symbol for them, if you like.
I see. Yeah.
Where it gets interesting is that there's Braille also is it has what's called contractions, which basically means that certain combinations of letters or a certain symbol in front of a letter can replace words. So, for example, an example I always give, which is probably an easy to understand one, is would is you could just write WD and could CD.
Yeah.
And I know, again, I never knew or thought about this at the time, because that's just so from the age of 5, 6, 7. That's how I would write words. You know, I didn't spell them out fully. I wrote them the shorthand. Um, and I came to realise then when it came to typing on using a computer or typewriter as we do now, that I realised that I actually didn't know how to spell a lot of words fully because
Because they'd been condensed.
because I'd only ever used the shorthand.
Yeah, yeah. I suppose it's a bit like British Sign Language and Makaton, where Makaton condenses everything and misses words out and sort of only uses the relevant words in a sentence to give an instruction, or, you know, and in a way that's the same, and it condenses everything down to make it easier, I suppose, and quicker.
Well, I guess, I mean, you know, when I was at school, I was there with my brailler and I was banging away, right, you know, whatever, and I'd always finish quicker because because I could write, produce. You know, it's a bit like now comparing handwriting to typing, I suppose.
Yeah.
You know, if someone's there typing away on their laptop, they, you know, are going to get it all out quicker than if you're handwriting it on paper. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, I mean, it's a very, you know, again, and you know, obviously I've known plenty of people and who have used Braille, be it from early life or come to it later in life. But of course, nowadays, you know, that there's a very different landscape with all the technology. So I don't actually know anybody that's, you know, just gone into primary school or so I'd be very interested to know what the sort of approach is nowadays with Braille. I mean, I hope. I mean, you know, it's difficult because you could certainly see why someone would argue that, you know, it's sort of outdated. But equally, I mean, you know, if I'm honest, I couldn't tell you the last time I wrote Braille. Read it again, yeah, now and then. But you know, the problem is, of course, it's just not readily available. So you just learn. You know, you don't expect, and it's quite funny because one of the common questions when you apply, when I was anyway, applying for benefits and such, they would ask you how you sort of how you communicated, and if you said you were a Braille user, you got less marks because in someone's mind, oh, if you read Braille, then you will be able to read signs and whatever, and you know, whatever it may be in Braille. But they missed the point that how many things are actually bothered to be put into Braille in the first place, and B, you've got to see where the Braille is to go and read it.
Yeah, yeah.
So that was always a contentious issue with. I don't know whether they're wised up to it now, but so many people I knew got so, was just, you know, how ridiculous. You know, you're marked down because you can read something that is only that the world at large doesn't bother with.
So what do you use now? Do you use voice recognition or?
No, well, alongside, you know, and again, this is where, you know, I'm really grateful for the fact that people, I don't know whether it was foresight or what, but the fact that I was also taught alongside Braille to touch type.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So when I was 6, I also had touch typing lessons. So, but you know, primarily I only had touch typing lessons, say, once a week, and the rest of the week I used Braille. So it was very much in the background. But then that meant that when, you know, the computer came along and took over, that you know, I was equipped for that. And then it's, as I've mentioned before, it's the screen reader software, which is you know, how, so you know, I type the same as, I mean, again, people do different things. Someone who maybe hasn't learned to touch type as a blind person maybe would prefer to dictate and have it done for them. But you know, because I've asked sighted people before, and I say, well, if you think about it, as I understand it, if you touch type, you don't look at the keys anyway.
No.
So you know, it's all level playing field in that respect.
And is a pad like you've got now more difficult than a typewriter because of the way it's set out? It's all on one level rather than different levels, or do you just get used to it and adapt to it?
Well, actually, no. Actually, to clarify, I never actually used one of those typewriters.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
The only one I ever used was everything I've ever used was a QWERTY keyboard. So
Yeah.
So it's all been the same. But you know, you just, I mean, and of course, you know, things constantly move on. So you've, you know, you went from the the desktop, big computer keyboards down to condensed keyboards where you could, it's like when I look at some of the small sort of, well, not even laptops, they're more like palm tops. But I think, well, you're supposed to touch type on that. You can barely, you can barely get both hands on it. So it depends what you prefer. But yeah, and of course, the next big change was, of course, touch screens, which I mean, I don't use. I mean, I think the technology is there now, and it's good enough if you wanted to. But I don't use a touch screen, computer. I do everything on the keyboard, and that's one of the big things as well. When particularly at work, when you're learning new systems, you have to get the message over. No, I don't use it the same as I don't grab the mouse and whiz around the screen and click. It's everything is on with the keyboard, and that completely stumps most people because they just do not know. Oh, that they know how to use it with the mouse, but they haven't got a clue how to use it with the keyboard.
Yeah.
So, it's an interesting. Well, like I say, I wouldn't be surprised if it does come up for debate in certain places. I mean. So I'd be interested to hear from anybody that has had any issues with whether it's their child's education or their own education, where they've had to sort of argue the case for Braille to be taught. But I think, I mean, for me, it's the thing is what Braille still gives you is that you can read. So like if I'm trying to give a speech or something, or I'm trying to listen to something on a computer at the same time of trying to talk or listen to somebody else talking. I mean, I can listen to more than one thing at once, but it's not how you ideally want to do it. So in other words, if you have Braille, you can read and speak as you read rather than having to listen to a couple of lines then try and repeat them back, or you can read and take in what's written down and listen to what someone's saying to you.
Yeah.
So, for me, for that reason, it still has, it still certainly provides something that a computer or technology doesn't. I mean, well, I'll say that, but there are these days Braille displays, as they call them, which, also, I mean, A, they cost thousands of pounds, and B, so you can produce Braille and read it without having to use screen software. But it's, like I say, it's still very, it's a lot of expense to get one for what it does for me. But for me, sometimes the old-fashioned, if you really want, I mean, like an example I remember was that when at my granddad's funeral, I obviously wouldn't be able to read the hymn book, so I knew what the hymns were going to be, so I thought, well, I'll get if I get the words then printed in Braille, I'll be able to read them.
Yeah. So
I did that, and I was able to read them, and rather than having to make them up. So little things like that, where because like I say, it's just not readily available, and it's. I mean, again, it's funny. People often say to me, "Oh, well, that." I don't know whether you've noticed, but on some things, particularly medication, there is Braille on there. So if you look on pill packets and even some bottles, there is Braille on there. And people go, "Oh, yeah," and I'll say, "Yeah, but that's fine. But the trouble is, it doesn't actually tell you. It still doesn't give you as much information, i.e., how much the dose is you should use. So you know what it is, but unless you happen to know that you shouldn't take more than, say, 2 paracetamol or whatever, or
And I suppose if the side effects aren't in Braille, then you're not going to know what that, because there's always a side effect.
Oh yeah, well they put that whole little leaflet inside,
all the
leaflet. So we don't get that much information, but it's something. But then and then when people say, "Oh well," and I say, "Yeah, but the problem is that with the best will in the world, they could put Braille on every single item in a supermarket." But the only way you're going to then find what you want is by picking up every single
item,
item,
running your fingers across it.
And every item.
It's in things like, are there specific companies that, literature for want of a better word, would they only manufacture, a classic in Braille, or is that not available anyway?
What, as in a classic?
Yeah, like I don't know, Jane Eyre or something like that. Would
Oh
that
yeah,
be in
yeah.
Braille, or would each publishing company publish a certain amount in Braille?
Well, again, it's not some. I mean, personally, I'm not really sure why, but I've always personally always preferred listening to books
Audio books,
rather
yeah,
than
yeah,
reading. But yeah, but that's
yeah,
just me. That's from a kid.
yeah,
But yeah, but there's the library for the blind, which is so Braille books. If you like your books as a blind person, you
yeah,
can get all sorts in Braille. But I think the major difference is the volumes. So if you want I remember, for example, when I was doing my history coursework for my A level, I needed to get a copy of Winston Churchill's autobiography
yeah,
for research. It was like 20 volumes.
yeah, yeah. Because of the thickness of the pages, I suppose. Yeah,
So whatever it is in print, you always know it's going to be much bigger in and again, a classic, always a good example is when if a letter comes through the post and I ask for, I mean, I don't bother so much these days, but for example, at one time they used to send. I used to get my bank statements sent to me in Braille,
yeah,
but also a print copy as well, because obviously, again, one of the downsides is that if you need it to prove it's no good having all your statements in Braille if you then need to use them as evidence to show to somebody else. So,
yeah. So you've got to have a physical copy anyway.
so you need the print one as well, but
Yeah, yeah,
the print one will be one page and the Braille will be about three. So
yeah,
the size difference is quite amusing, but yeah, but so the classics like you mentioned, the novels. In fact, actually, one of the we studied for English Pride and Prejudice, and that was about 6 volumes, I think.
yeah.
So yeah, they're available, but you've really got to enjoy your reading, I think, to wade through it all.
Yeah, because there's always that debate as is listening to an audio book actually reading. There was a massive debate on the radio not long ago, whereas you engulf yourself in. And I wonder if you're following the story in Braille that you get the same sensation as reading a book. I suppose you do in a way. You get taken away somewhere else.
I'd imagine so. I mean, to me, I mean, I mean, what do I say? I say I listen to a book. I suppose I don't use how I read in order. I listen to it.
Yeah, yeah.
But for me, it's a bit like listen to an audio book. It's like listen to the radio.
Yeah.
Or you sort of. But you still. I mean, I don't know. We all do. But like, I imagine. In your head, you've got your own sort of visual sort of
Interpretation
going on.
Yeah, yeah.
And I suppose that's the same whether whether it's coming to you through your eyes reading it in print or your fingers reading it in Braille or your ears. So we all sort of, however we take it in, we sort of interpret it our own way, don't we? And that's obviously why 10 people can read the same book, but then all sort of have different thoughts on it. So.
Yeah, it's whatever their own histories are, they bring that to what they're engaged with, really. And that's to do with everything, and it's, everything's subjective, really, in terms of the creative fields anyway.
But going back to Louis for a minute, he it's funny because if I had a list of tick boxes or that people seem to think that as a blind person you tick, it would include things such as have guide dog, play instrument, or be musical, as some people once put it to me, and have really good hearing, and be able to tune pianos, and it's and Louis actually he well, in a way it's a shame because he. The school or institution he went to, he ended up staying on there and becoming a professor, and obviously passing on. Teaching people in Braille, and also a musician. He played at famous venues. I don't know whether it was all over France, or just around Paris where he was. But yeah, so he was musical, and again, and the thing with Braille, I mean, I've never learnt it but there's also in the same way you have music in print, there's music in Braille.
Yeah.
So that's a whole different thing. That if you do play music, you learn to read Braille music. So again, he created that arm of it, and
It's unbelievable that one man can have so much influence, isn't it?
Well-
On the whole development of it.
well, the sadness is, as with a lot of things, he didn't actually, because unfortunately he died when he was only 43, due to what they seem to think now was tuberculosis. So he really didn't get to see what how far it would all go for, and the fact it would become what it became. Which is often the way with a lot of things that are invented, but yeah, for what he did, was, and what that then led to, because I like to say that, that was, the 1800s, it was going to be a good, 100 years or whatever before computers came. The world we know today, and is absolutely worlds away from what, as a blind person you had to try and communicate and survive. So to be able to thrash out a living and what he did, is a great thing. Although it's just a bit sad that he spent all of his life in an institution, really.
Yeah.
And I guess that's maybe one of the reasons why it didn't really, because obviously, back then, I mean, in the day and age of the internet, news flies around the world in a second. But back then, of course, if it probably wasn't even. I don't know. It probably wasn't even known outside France for years. So
For years and years, yeah. Fascinating.
Yeah, he's very much recognised in France nowadays because he's buried in the Pantheon in Paris. So he's very much. I think he got the recognition, unfortunately after he died rather than when he was alive in many ways. But it's certainly a key person who, whatever the population or the blind population, I don't know what it is or how many Braille users there are, but be more than 1 million across the world, and like I say, it's even with the technology has come along and taken a lot of a lot of uses that Braille had away, but it still, like I say, stands on its own in some aspects. And the things you can do with it is funny as well, because one of the things I did with it was back when I was at primary school. I was about 9, and they were making a sensory garden at the school. So having things that were tactile, sound, and all that kind of gubbins. And they randomly asked me if I would create a wall with a Braille message to go in a wall.
Oh yeah.
So and so the main thing I liked about it was the teacher that was sort of doing it. I don't know whose idea it was originally or whatever, but the teacher that worked on it with me was my support teacher for maths, and so it meant that once a week I got out of maths. So I was quite happy about it. But we came up with. I had to think of what I wanted it to say, and I decided on a sensory garden 1994, because that was the year. So, and then we had to think about how the Braille letters would work in brick. So basically so they built it so that the brick so each dot, so a brick represented a dot or two dots would be indented. So you'd have to feel for the bricks that were indented into the wall, and and read the message. And it was. I didn't build it, but we
So you sort of designed it, yeah.
And then they built it, and then they asked me to lay the last brick for a bit of a photo and whatever. So I put the A on at the beginning, but yeah, and as far as I know, unless someone's gone and knocked it down,
there.
it's still
Wow.
there. But Bromley Hills in Kings Winford. If anybody goes there or knows someone that goes there, have a look. It's
And that's in the. Is it in the school playground or?
it's in it was it wasn't the plague. It was like in a section.
Yeah.
A se- it was sort of in the middle of the school building sort of thing. I guess it may have been a playground at one time, but no, yeah. So I should find out actually.
That's a great legacy, that is, though, isn't it? Really. But as you say, I wonder how many kids pass it and think, I wonder what that is. If it's still there.
Yeah, well,
I wonder what that is.
It's one of those. Actually, I probably don't want to investigate it because I found out someone knocked it down. I'd be gutted.
Yeah, yeah. And also, if I don't know, X amount of hands has passed it, it would eventually, similar to the Wailing Wall, it would eventually reshape the brick, wouldn't it? The number of people who touch it. Yeah, it's a bit like the statues where they've rubbed the nose off somebody because they've touched the nose for some reason and the nose is gone. But that's absolutely fascinating. That is really.
So yeah, and you get. I mean, again, I know board games are going out of fashion, but again, it's like, I always say, if I had kids, I wouldn't be able to play computer games with them.
Yeah.
So things like Braille Monopoly, Braille Scrabble, not that I can spell, but I've had tactile Snakes and Ladders.
I was going to say, would you have all the old games with the bit tactile?
Yeah. Well, there's not many of them, but but the point is that whereas I wouldn't be able to interact. And again, this is what I found when I was a kid growing up. I'd often end up sitting there watching while other kids play computer games, because board games weren't as seen as cool. But for me, so again about interaction. As a blind person, you can't interact and compete and in online I mean you can some nowadays, but not the same range as sighted people can. So and in chess, play chess. Well, you need a tactile chessboard, and
So would the squares be raised on or ridged in order to where you're putting it in a square?
They're which way round is it? I think the black ones are raised, and the white ones are indented.
Recessed,
and then the pieces are basically pegs almost. They're shaped like normal pieces, but they have a peg at the bottom which goes in a hole, so you can feel the board without knocking them over. Basically, because obviously if you're constantly feeling chess pieces on a sighted board, they'd slide all over the place. So even if it's not Braille itself involved, it's just ways of bringing things alive with tactile and again, I'm not sure where it came from, but when I was young, I was bought I always used to like geography, and particularly looking at maps, because I've always sort of found it interesting understanding where places are in the world and, where things are in relation to each other. And so, I used to have, I've still got them somewhere, but Braille maps and things like that, which help you to, piece, because again, you can't, a sighted person these days just bring up Google Maps or whatever and have a look, but again, you can't, as good as screen reading software is, it can't bring pictures to life. So being able to feel the layout of and again, that doesn't just go for countries in the world, of course it goes for anything, buildings, for example, or things like that, or anything where I don't know, if you go to a National Trust place or something, you get given a map of the layout or something. So it's just Braille in that sense. You can't do that on a computer, so that's where Braille and still really comes into its own with being able to communicate with, for those of us that can't read or see.
And it's all the organisations being aware of that, isn't it? And they either choose to embrace it and do something about it, or not, and just think, oh well, we're only going to have a few blind people, so it ain't worth doing it.
Well, this is the problem, and I've had this exact conversation with, I won't name names, but various organisations and even people who say, we want to be the really accessible, we want anything, but then as soon as you start saying, okay, well, what about then? And then but how many people? I said, well, I don't know, but you never. you're never going to. The whole point about disability, whatever it is it's a minority.
Yeah.
So, if you want to be what you say you want to be, you have to not base it on, numbers. Whatever it costs, if that's the issue, whatever it may cost, you can't look at it as a being cost effective exercise, because it won't be. You've got to do it because you want to give that service and the best possible experience to, whatever your audience is, because otherwise, um, you know, what it will do is bring in blind people, or whatever disability it may be, bring them in to experience what it is you want them to experience. But if you don't make those changes or offer those things, then they won't, and so they won't come, full stop.
They won't come, full stop.
So we're out of time for this episode of A Blind Insight. I hope you found it informative and interesting, and give you an idea of how important Braille has been and still is, in my opinion, to the education of children who start off their lives blind, and how it enables us to try and communicate better with the world around us. As always, I'd love to hear from you, particularly on this topic, if you've currently going through the education system yourself, or have children that are and having to learn Braille and do things in a different way. You can email me at simonhill_6@hotmail.com, or leave a comment on the podcast page. And it'll be an ongoing debate, as I say, as technology moves on. Will Braille get left behind? I really hope not, because I think there are some things that technology just can't replace, but we will see what happens. Until the next time, I hope you stay safe, and we'll be back again soon.